Good morning, church. Wow. How's everyone doing this morning? Yeah? We're good? Not good day. I like that. It is a good day. Well, if you are new here, my name is Sarah Havon. I am part of the preaching and teaching team. And we are in the second week of looking through the book of 1 Peter. 1 Peter is actually a letter written by one of Jesus' disciples, Peter. And that letter was written to a group of Christians that were scattered amongst what is now considered like modern-day Turkey. And Peter he was one that, if you know his character, he was one that was always messing up. And there was always something, like he would charge in, he would be the first to jump and then fail. And he was just one that was surrounded by great risk, but also great disappointment and in need of great grace and encouragement from Jesus. And the amazing thing about this book is that Peter is writing to a group of Christians that are on fire for Jesus, but in the midst of their passion and their transformation as a community, they're also experiencing persecution from the other people around them. Now, the persecution that they're experiencing wasn't as violent as Rome. Rather, it looked like they were being exiled because they had chosen in a polytheistic society where there were many gods, many gods. So gods took the form of family gods, and even in the trades, there were different gods that were worshipped in the trades. And nationality, there were different gods that were worshipped for people groups and all of this. And suddenly this group of Christians, this church now says, no, I'm not going to worship any other of these gods. So people would be worshiping multiple. And they said, no, I'm going to worship the one true God. But in that, they started experiencing families turning their back on them, saying, you're not going to worship our family God? Are you not loyal to our family anymore? And so they were disowned by their families. Second thing, in their professional capacity. So you're no longer going to worship the God of your trade. Do you not want to see your trade succeed? Do you not want to prosper? And so they were seen as unprofessional, and probably a lot of people then decided, well, I'm not going to go to you if I need this to happen. And so they're experiencing economic persecution, where suddenly they're stripped of their wealth and their prosperity, their means of life and source of income. And in terms of national worship of different gods, they said, no, we are going to worship the one true God. We're not going to worship the God of my people. And so they became disowned socially, saying, are you not patriotic? Do you not want to be loyal to your people group? And so in all of these things, this people group is being stripped of, their economic standing. They're being stripped of titles, and they're being socially ostracized. And Peter is seeing this and hearing this from the church and news, and he's writing from Rome saying, I want to encourage you, because you may feel like outsiders, you may feel like an exiled people group or foreigners, but you are chosen. You have belonging, and you have a purpose. And so Peter we see as the great person that needed encouragement, to now being the great encourager, being the rock that Jesus said, you're going to be the person that I'm going to build my church on. So in that, let's open in prayer. Lord, people may come this morning with feeling like they have nothing. God, I pray that you would remind them that you are everything. That though they come with nothing, they can receive. Lord, I pray this morning if people are coming feeling distant, feeling disowned, feeling isolated, God, that you would remind them that they have belonging in you. Lord, if people are coming this morning feeling like, what do I do next? Where do I go from here? God, you have given us purpose. Lord, I pray this morning as we talk about what this looks like, God, that you would be prompting in me. God, you would be prompting in each one of us. How do we live fuller into that understanding and that knowledge? Lord, be with us this morning. Give us ears to hear your word alone. God, give us eyes to see what it is that you're doing, and Lord, a heart to receive that is open and honest and vulnerable before you, the God of all things. In your name we pray. Amen. All right, so we're picking up. Last week, Josh really set us up to understand what Peter was trying to do. And it is an incredible opening of this book, of this letter to these people, where Peter is encouraging them with such profound words and reminding them, hey, even though things are temporary, you have an inheritance. Though you are losing all of your means of wealth and economic standing and prosperity and a life in community, you have belonging and you have an inheritance that is eternal. And then he moves on to saying this in 1 Peter chapter 1, verses 13. Peter writes, Therefore, because you have all of this, your response should be this. Therefore, prepare your minds for action. Keep sober in spirit. Set your hope completely on the grace to be brought to you at the revelation of Jesus Christ. Therefore, he opens up, he reminds them with this phrase, prepare your minds for action. You see, a lot of times when we start identifying ourselves as Christians, we lose this understanding and we get caught up saying it's not something that we just stop at to say, I'm a Christian. But it's something that Peter is going to keep going towards, saying, in order for you to carry that title, it's going to look a certain way. You're going to be taking on a certain identity. And that certain identity of being a Christ follower, it takes work. It takes intentional work where you're pouring into it and you're looking at it going, how am I moving forward? In verse 14, Peter then moves on to this, saying the how. As obedient children, you belong. You're now children. You're brought in, but it means obedience. As obedient children, do not conform to the evil desires you had when you lived in ignorance. But just as he who called you is holy, so be holy in all you do. For it is written, be holy because I am holy. So Peter gives them two charges. The first one of the prepare your mind is this. Do not conform to the evil desires. So don't conform. Now, looking at the Greek text, the word here is, now, bear with me here, systematizo, which it means to conform or fashion oneself according to a pattern or model. This is, this sounds really great and all, but one of the things to note about this word is it is like looking like something on the outside. So an example of this was when I first moved to the States here. I had an accent that I really didn't realize I had. And I would be talking on the phone with somebody, and they're like, wait, where are you from? And I'm like, what? I talk just like you. What's going on? And they pointed out, no, you've got an accent. And I said, well, I'm Canadian. And they're like, that's it. But as I started living in the States, and I've been here for about 10 years now, my accent has been lost in a lot of sense. A lot of people can't pick up that I'm still a foreigner because I've been my language and how I speak has conformed to the people around me. Now, when I go home and I'm around other Canadians and around my family who tend to have a little bit more of a country Canadian drawl, my accent comes out again because I'm around them. And so what Paul is saying here is don't conform, don't mesh in and kind of evolve into a society and still look like the people around you, where it becomes a surface level thing. Another way that we can do that is we start taking on attitudes and start looking like the people around us in negative ways. So maybe it's not necessarily an accent. Maybe it's more of an attitude of, oh, well, we're at work again today, and, you start gossiping. And you start getting caught up in that. And you're not taking the time to say, wait a second, this is not how I want to look. And you walk away feeling like guilty, going, what did I do? Paul writes this in Romans 12:12. He says, do not conform to the patterns of this world. Don't conform, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. And in that same understanding, Peter then calls these people of the church, these exiled Christians, to say, be holy because your God is holy. This being transformed, as opposed to being conformed, is this word. This is where I'm going to get caught up again. Sumophysio, which is conforming to what is essential, complete or durable, not merely a form or outline. You see, the difference between those two words is the first word tends to be a lot more ebb and flow, where you're just so waving of changing different styles, like the patterns of the world does, of every year you realize my clothes are no longer in style. Or you're changing the patterns of who you're hanging out with. Who are you surrounding yourself with? And you're starting to look like that, where it just becomes really moldable and ever-changing, and nothing is ever certain. But in this understanding of be holy because I am holy, as our God is holy, it's conforming to what is essential, what is deep, what is within us. It is our core being. Whereas when we're going into certain situations, we stand steady. Our character doesn't change. There is a steadiness to us because we are holy. We serve a God that is holy. One of the things that I am learning and have learned in the past is I learn under mentors. And I have these people in my life that I'm constantly going back to that I see that type of life in them, where they are steady. In any situation, they're holding true to their faith in Jesus. And so I'm learning not only to follow my Jesus, follow my Lord, and understand who he is in the innermost, but I'm surrounding myself with people who I know also are doing the same. And I'm learning from them. And I'm learning that, okay, this is what it looks like. And I'm working on that more and more to say, God, who are the people that are mentoring me? But also, who do I need to mentor if you've brought me to that place? See, Philippians 3:10, it says this, I want to know Christ, yes, to know the power of his resurrection and participate in his suffering, becoming, that is the word, the sumo physio, the becoming like him in our innermost being in his death. We need to be shaped intentionally and practice this intentionally, even to the point of recognizing that being shaped like this is going to involve sacrifice. It's going to involve us laying down certain things. It's going to involve us cutting off certain things in our life, saying that is not holy. That is something that I need to surrender. That is something that I need to lay down so I can be like my Jesus. You see, the life of disciple is prescribed, which I think a lot of people don't understand. There is a prescription that you need to follow if you are going to be a follower of Jesus. You see, we get to choose whether or not we're going to follow Jesus. That is a choice that we have. But after that, what a lot of people don't understand is we don't get to choose what that looks like. We don't get to pick and choose, well, no, I don't want to do the whole sacrifice thing. I don't want to, lay down this certain thing. Then you're not really following. You're choosing not to. But if you choose to follow Jesus, you need to recognize that in doing so, you don't get to choose the path. No, Jesus, we're going to go here. Jesus walked a straight and narrow line to the cross. So if we choose to follow our Jesus, that's the direction we're heading. But he also walked into the grave and walked out. That is the direction that we're heading. We're heading to eternity. Any other direction we choose is going to be away from that. Any other direction we choose, we miss out on the empty tomb. We miss out on the eternal. We miss out on the resurrection. We miss out on that life. I need you to get this, because this is what salvation looks like. You see, we can say the words, we can do that, but unless we are actually following Jesus to the cross, we don't get to experience the resurrection. The second thing that Peter then moves into is that not only are we to live like foreigners in the land, where we're choosing to follow our God, but we need to start looking like foreigners. He writes this, I'm going to read through, I don't have a slide for this because I want you to listen. So 1 Peter 1:17-21. Since you are called on a Father who judges each man's work impartially, live your lives as strangers here in reverent fear. For you know that it was not with perishable things such as silver or gold that you were redeemed from the empty way of life handed down to you from your forefathers, but with the precious blood of Christ, a lamb, who without blemish or defect, he was chosen before the creation of the world, but was revealed in these last times for your sake. Through him you believe in God, who raised him from the dead and glorified him, so that your faith and hope are in God. Since you are called, this is 1 Peter 1:17, since you are called on a Father who judges each person's work impartially, live out your time as foreigners here in reverent fear. As I said, looking like foreigners tends to look different. You get called out, hey, that's a different accent. But it also means looking like foreigners, you're having different values. You have different priorities in your life. And sometimes it tends to cause tension or even misunderstandings. Oh, wait a second. Why don't you want to go to a football game on a Sunday? Why are you spending so much time with that group of people when you've got other things that you should be doing, like spending time with the family? Where are your priorities at? The second thing that looking and living like a foreigner is that really has got me this week is having different rights and freedoms. Maybe it's because we're in election season, I'm realizing I don't get to vote. But here's the thing though, that I am being reminded of. When we hold tightly to our rights and freedoms and find our identity in our rights and freedoms, what happens when we encounter a God who then says, give them up because I want something different? What happens when we decide to surrender something that we're finding identity in? It's hard. But this people group was in that, where suddenly they were losing their voting rights. They were losing their right to make money, their right to attend maybe a worship service or be with the people on a certain time. They were giving those rights up because they understood that their nationality was no longer earthly. It was now heavenly. And so when we fight for certain rights here, are we understanding, or if we're holding on to certain rights so tightly that maybe, just maybe, those rights that we're holding on to are actually causing harm to somebody else? Hard stuff. But what happens when we give them up because we start seeing eternity? Because we start seeing a God who judges everyone equally. So you're not going to get into heaven with your wealth. You're not going to get into heaven with all the good that you've done, with everything that you've done earthly. You see, it's going to be that holy passport of recognizing that I have died with Christ. Of recognizing that I have laid down my life for this holy identity because I see the eternal of what God is doing. You see, the second thing that he talked about in this, living out our time as foreigners, is with reverent fear. This fear isn't living in terror of punishment or the slightest broken rule. Rather, it is an awe in the face of a holy and all-powerful God who is utterly just and good. No longer are we in fear of the person next to us and what they can do, but rather we are in fear in this reverent awe of God, what are you doing? How are you going to take this situation and build purpose into it? How are you going to take this relationship that I am so fearful that's causing so much tension and transform it? How are you going to make me just be in awe of the things? Josh talked last week about this expectation that God, you are going to do something in the midst of this because you are the eternal. And that is what we need to put our faith in. Proverbs 29:25 says this, fear of man will prove us to be a snare, but whoever trusts in the Lord is kept safe. You see, when we anchor our holy identity in Jesus, we no longer fear man and we no longer trust, these are the things that I'm going to do. Because in that, when we fear man instead of God, we then start looking at earthly things much more. We then start looking at relationships and economics and the media and saying, oh, I don't live up to that. And we're trying harder to please that rather than to please a God that we're living in reverent fear of and holy expectation of a Lord who keeps us safe. You see, in an ever-changing world, we have an unchangeable God. Christine Kane said this. And it's been something that has stirred up in me to recognize, ever-changing, relationships change, status change, money changes, all of these things that can cause us anxiety and fear, they change. But when we put our hope and trust in a never-changing, in a constant God, unchanging, that is what is going to set us. That is what is going to rid us of the earthly fear, for us to recognize a holy God who we live in a reverent expectation of. So Peter continues with this work, and this work side of roll up your sleeves because this life means work. And I hope that you're seeing today that this life means work. We're following Jesus, it means work. And Peter continues in verse 22 in chapter 1. Now that you have purified yourselves by obeying the truth. So now that you've gone through this work of obeying and following Jesus, obeying the truth, so that you have sincere love for each other. Love one another deeply from the heart. Peter then prompts his people to stop looking inwardly at themselves and saying, no, the work doesn't stop with just you. That's where it starts. But the work continues of how are you loving the person next to you? And he's challenging them, saying, love with purpose and impact. You see, if we're no longer fearing man, we have the ability to love with sincerity, to love with this deep love from the heart. Now, at the time, this heart understanding was considered the center of a person. Their depth, their passion, their desires, their will, that was all within the heart. And so Peter is saying to them, if you are following Jesus and you're no longer fearing man, but you're fearing God with this reverent fear, now you have the ability to love authentically and love deeply. Now you have the ability to love with impact. Not just to say, okay, I love you and I'll be there for you, but to love that goes beyond yourself and into eternity, to love with this impact. We're free from this people-pleasing, from a fear of messing up, from a fear of disappointing. And we're free of this internal agenda even of, what do I want to get out of this relationship? Because we're understanding Jesus holds the agenda. He's the one pointing us in the direction we're supposed to go. But on the opposite side of that too, when we find ourselves being purified and obeying Jesus, we're free from bitterness of others' faults and failures towards us. And I think that's the more true narrative. And I think that's what Peter found as well, because he then moves into this in chapter 2. Therefore, rid yourself of all malice and all deceit, hypocrisy, envy, and slander of every kind. Like newborn babies, crave spiritual milk, so that it is by you may grow in your salvation, now that you have tasted that the Lord is good. So you've been there and tasted it. Peter's saying this: rid yourself of all malice, deceit, hypocrisy, envy, and slander of every kind. What would this do in our relationships if we're filled with malice, deceit, hypocrisy, envy, and slander, or even one of these things? If we approach a relationship or have malice in a friendship or something, what does that do? A person starts drawing back going, ooh, that was nasty, that was mean. Or if we have deceit, no longer is that person able to trust us. If we have hypocrisy, no longer do they feel like, oh, I see this two-facedness that you have. Envy, where we enter into relationships going, oh, I can't love you because, there's this thing that you have that I want, that you have that I want, and, all of these things stand in the way from us having that deep desire and impact to love the person next to us. And so when Peter is saying, rid yourselves of these things, maybe it's not all of them, but maybe it's one thing on that list going, that's something I need to work on, especially in this relationship. Because that is a barrier that is standing in front of me having an impacting love that builds somebody up for the kingdom, for eternity. You see where I'm going here? And this is something that I am working on as well. How do I love? Are there barriers in the way? Are there things in the way? But when we're intentionally ridding ourselves of these things, this is what now looks like. So that you can love with benevolence. Imagine having a relationship where you are just constantly being, yeah, I got time for that. Yeah, I can show you that love. Because there's no malice here. No, I want to give freely of what I have. That benevolence, and I want to give joyfully in that. We're loving with honesty. Where a person's not questioning, what's your motive here? How many friendships do you wish were built on this honesty? Loving with sincerity, with generosity, and with adoration and encouragement. These are kingdom perspectives. Because we're no longer looking at earthly things, but we're looking at what is the eternal impact that I have on the person next to me. And if I am loving with benevolence, honesty, sincerity, generosity, adoration, encouragement, you best believe you're going to look very different from some of the relationships that you've seen in your life. And your relationships to another can look very different from what they have experienced. Because you're loving with impact. You're loving with purpose. Can you imagine, and we're going to get into this next week too, about how when we follow Jesus, our love has impact because we're starting to focus on relationships like this for eternity, where we're able to win people for Christ, to show them this is what Jesus looks like. And living for Christ to the people that maybe are oppressing them. because this is how Jesus loved. The next thing that Peter does is he redirects us that in this loving, we're building things that are going to last. And he starts using this language of this temple being built up. And so we start seeing like foreigners. We start seeing the things around us so differently. And Peter writes this, 1 Peter 2, 4-6. As you come to him, the living stone, rejected by men, but chosen by God and precious to him, you also, like living stones, are being built into a spiritual house to be a holy priesthood, offering spiritual sacrifices acceptable to God through Jesus Christ. For in Scripture it says, "See, I lay a stone in Zion, a chosen and precious cornerstone, and the one who trusts in him will never be put to shame." I want to ask you this for a moment. Who are the people in your life that have had the biggest impact? And how have they loved you? This is a positive impact, because I know that there is negative that have an opposite effect. But who are the positive people in your life who have made the biggest impact? And what was it about that? What was it about the way that they loved you? See, for me, it was those that called me to look beyond myself and my fears and challenged me to grow. But in that, there was an honesty. There was no deceit in there, and there was encouragement in that. It was those that walked alongside of me. I didn't have fear of rejection. And even those that made the humbling effort to reconcile. One of my deepest relationships that I've had, and I hold dearly to it to this day. There was a point in our life where there was envy that was getting in the middle of things. There was stuff that was happening that really divided us. But then we came to the point where we came back together and said, I didn't do things right here. And there was a reconciling that happened. That's one of the deep relationships that has had impact on my life, because there was a humbling effort on both of our parts to reconcile, to love each other, to lay aside our envy, and to say, no, I'm going to give forgiveness generously, and I'm going to let you know what I did. Another thing that happened for me is those that were investing, that benevolence and generosity. And it was investing more than just finances, even though I've had people in my life that have made impact of investing finances. But it was also those who invested their personal space. When I was single and in ministry, which can be so isolating, I had about 3 different families in the church that said to me, our house is your house. So after hard meetings, I would be heading over to their house because they gave benevolently. They gave with generosity of their time, of their space, saying, no, come on over. But in that, though, they were building into me these leadership understandings. Even some of them were showing me what parenting can look like before I'd even reached there. And what partnership can look like, because I got to see their marriages. And what faithfully waiting can look like. And so in those relationships, as they loved me with a full and honest and deep and integral love, they were building kingdom impact, where they were seeing in me another living stone and saying, let's build you into the body. Let's build you up so we can be strong, so we can go further. See, I think in the church, where we think that a lot of people leave the church because there is deep damage. And I've been a part of it. I've been with a person that, or I've worked with a person that there was deep hypocrisy. And I had a pastor who knew what was going on in that situation saying, I'm amazed that you went back into ministry. I said, because I have people loving into me beyond that hurt. I have people loving into me saying, look at the kingdom, look at eternal. Stop looking at the present. You see, we're joined with purpose, and I think that's one thing that we really need to see, is that we are joined with purpose. As we are inviting other people in, saying, let's offer up spiritual sacrifices of our time, of our treasures, of our abilities, so that we can be a holy people in a place where people can feel loved in deep ways. But then Peter, he moves into this understanding of this cornerstone of who Jesus is. See, I lay a stone in Zion, a chosen and precious cornerstone, and the one who trusts in him will never be put to shame. See, Jesus is that cornerstone that we need to build our lives on. I looked up what a cornerstone is, and I know we talked about this a little bit more, but the purpose of the cornerstone was not only to set the foundation, but the cornerstone would dictate the building's orientation and alignment. The cornerstone would be the one to say, this is the way the building is going to face and how it's going to sit. And I think that in itself was what Peter was getting at when he said that there was the cornerstone become a stumbling stone for some, because they look at the orientation and alignment of the way that Jesus wants to build his house and his community. And they say, that does not look like what I want. See, in ancient times, when a person was building a house, they were looking at the place that they wanted to orient it would bring prosperity, that it would bring good fortune to the household. And Jesus, however, says, no, I'm calling for sacrifice. And they didn't know what to do with that. That is not what we want to build our house on. But now, to you who believe, this stone is precious. But to those who do not believe, the stone the builders rejected has become the capstone, and a stone that causes men to stumble, and a rock that makes them fall. Like I said, we get to choose whether or not we're going to follow Jesus. We get to choose where we're going to be building our house. We don't get to choose what the house is going to look like, where it's going to be oriented, because Christ has already chosen that. He's chosen the direction we're going. But the house that Jesus is building is eternal. When we look at our relationships, when we look at the way that we are treating others, the way that we are building our life, the priorities, the rights that we're surrendering, we need to be looking at the eternity of God. What is this eternal kingdom that you're building? What is the impact that you want to have? So I want to close this up with this today, and this reminder. I want to, hopefully, for us to carry through the week. Peter closes this section in verses 9 and 10. He states this once more to the people, this encouragement. But you are a chosen people, though you've been rejected. You are a royal priesthood. You're the ones that are offering up these sacrifices, these sacred and holy sacrifices for eternity. A holy nation. You're to look like foreigners and live like foreigners. God's special possession. You have belonging. that you may declare the praises of him who called you out of darkness into his wonderful light. Once you were not a people, but now you are a people of God. Once you had not received mercy, but now you've received mercy. No matter what you encounter this week, if Christ is your cornerstone, be reminded you're chosen, you have status, you have belonging. Turn to somebody next to you and tell them, you're chosen, you have purpose, you have status, and you belong. Because sometimes we need to be reminded of that, and I think that's where that love comes in. That you can come up. As we head into this week, anchor yourself in these things. Work on yourself to say, what is the envy? If there's envy, deceit, hypocrisy, any of those things that are in my life, how do I rid them? How do I build relationships that are benevolent, that are reconciling, that are deeply loving with sincerity and honesty? How do I anchor myself on the cornerstone and build my life in the direction that he is building the church? Let me pray for us. God, be with us this morning. As we have just opened your word, Lord, I pray that we would be reminded that in this life, there is struggle of being a Christian. There's work to be done, not only in us, of God, search me and know me. Reveal my faults. Help me to live with reverent fear of you. Not fear that I'm going to be reprimanded for anything that might come up, but Lord, reverent fear and expectation that you are the one transforms. And God, if there are relationships here that need to be transformed, I pray that you would do that. If there are lives here that need to be reoriented on you, the cornerstone, Lord, I pray that you would give stones, living stones, to come alongside of those people and build them up. Lord, be with us this morning and throughout this week, God. Remind us that we're chosen. We have purpose, we have status, and we belong. In your name we pray. Amen.